Welcome to another Federal Fiscal Grants Communities of Practice. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful summer day. I want to remind everybody that we are recording this session. So if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat, you can unmute, but we're just glad you could attend today. We also have closed captioning on today. It's a whirlwind of a school year closing, and so we always have a nice full package for you guys, and we're going to get started. So today's agenda, oops, I forgot to update this slide. It's actually July. We're going to talk through what's on your radar. We're going to talk about the data acquisition calendar's new look. We're going to talk about recaps from last month. Really, we had a really strong group last month. We talked about all kinds of good stuff. Then we're going to do our federal program highlight of the month is going to be special education. We're going to have a nice overview with Debbie Smith. She's going to be able to give you guys a highlights and some insights into what it is that those program directors are trying to do. And again, these high-level overviews, I think, are just so invaluable for folks in the business office that may not get out there as often and understand what the core programmatic components might be. So it's nice to have these highlights and overviews just to grasp a little bit better about what's going on in these different programs. And our PD, our professional development in 15, we're going to talk about gift cards, purchases, and use. Maybe give you guys some clout and some understanding and some grounds to stand on if you get challenged on gift cards. And we'll talk about procurement overall for federal grants and federal funds. And then we'll do a little bit of talk about some upcoming trainings that are available, and then some changes to our schedule as well. So let's talk about what is on our radar. We always open up. Here is this new look to the data acquisition calendar for the new year. There are now Excel versions that are already have the ability for you to sort, so you don't have to do all that self-sorting. So that's really nice that they put that out there. So when you get in there, if you notice, here we are, it's the 18th, and so half of this is already passed, but there's still a couple things coming up. There is an assessment participation rate appeal. So if you need to do that, make sure you get a hold of IACA or Karen Striegel. And then by the end of the month, you've got to do those bus inventory odometer reports. So somebody in transportation needs to get that in. So make sure you guys as a collective group at your district or charter has somebody in charge of that component. And then the last line of each of our calendar views always kind of gives us that first date of the next month. So that's why this one is showing up here. It's an at-risk disproportionality webinar. Now, this is something that you'll be invited to if you happen to be at risk. And this is more on the programmatic side for your program directors. So you'll know if you get that email. Now let's take a look really at the full month of August, because there's actually a lot here. So we know that school restarts for the most of you guys, and that there's a lot of things that happen that month. So student engagement and safety really has quite a few different things on here. So somebody that's in charge of that's going to be quite busy. We know that we have some other eligibility correction opportunities for special education. That's with Elisa, and Debbie can help facilitate some of those things as well. And then we have public school finance, just one on their radar this month. So make sure that you in the business office know who it might be you is in charge of that line item about request for separate school status. It's kind of rare. And then civil rights compliance reports, child nutrition has a couple items there. So make sure that you're talking to somebody in that department, make sure that that does not fall off their radar as we all get back to school and get really busy really fast. And again, there's that last the at-risk disproportionality webinar. Now that's going to be around the 15th. So you will get notified if you're needing to attend that. Okay. So let's do a quick overview recap. The recording and the PDF are both posted, the full ones and the broken out sections. Just to recap real quick, we did something on CEP, we did indirect costs, and we did a closeout list for grants. So high overview again, CEP is the community eligibility provision. It's an option for qualifying schools to serve free lunches to all students, but there are certain qualifications that you have to have. So a lot of times You get these free meal reports without the application. So it's not the free and reduced lunch application so much as it could just be qualifying through a program like SNAP. And if you can see that you meet that minimum 40% threshold or higher, this could be a go for you. So I got a link to the resources here on the community eligibility provision on the child nutrition page here at the SDE. And last month, the gal that reported with us, it was just really invaluable. So if you've never heard of that, that's something to definitely look at. Now, for tips and tricks last month, we went over a fiscal year end checklist for grants specifically, but you can use it for other things. But we just introduced this because grants are wonky and they have different reporting requirements, just different things that you have to do that are different from your regular day-to-day things. And that might mean that you need to get a hold of that program director before they go off contract for the summer so that you can get some answers that you need. But these checklists are there to help you prioritize and monitor all these necessary tasks. You in the business office might not know that you can close a PO out because somebody's done with billing or that isn't going to happen. We decided not to buy that. So all these different things are in these checklists. I put down here at the bottom, could your LEA benefit from this? Streamline these tasks. Use this as a starting point, though, for all of your business practices. If you haven't taken a look at that guide yet, it is posted. It's helpful. I sent it out yesterday when I did the reminder for today's session. Customize it, make a list, think about making a playbook, if you will, for your business office on all the things you need to do to close it out so that you don't lose track of, again, those wonky things that are one-off reports and things that you might have to do to close something out. Okay, now we also talked about indirect, which this is my favorite super person picture. It makes me feel super when I can help other people understand the purpose and intent behind something. And, I got some good feedback on indirect that, some districts have just never looked at it. They thought, oh, we don't want to have to charge our programs for that. But at the end of the day, the program staff can't run their programs without somebody in the business office. Somebody's doing the purchasing, somebody's doing all the accounting behind it, right? Somebody's doing payroll, HR functionality. There's all these other pieces of the pie that have to happen behind the scenes for any grant program to work and to function. So when you do if you do decide as a district or charter to apply for that rate through school finance, and we went through all of that last month, if you get that approved rate, you apply this cost, and once you collect that, it's like you've scooped up money that's then lost its federal flavor, if you will. It is now not considered a federal fund, so it can be spent on other things that you need once you've recouped that as an indirect cost. So that was eye-opening to some folks that had no idea. So that's what the Communities of Practice is about. It's to give insights about all these, complex things you may have heard of but not understood, make you think a little bit differently. Maybe it is time for us to do some of these things just to start conversations in general with your leadership teams, your business office to program staff, just to get the ball rolling and think about things differently. And now with that, we are going to introduce Debbie Smith. She is our support and monitoring coordinator under the special ed programs here at the SDE. And she's going to walk you through just in general, give you some high level ideals about, what is the special education program? What's the premise behind it? And what do they do to get started? All right, Debbie, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
And can you see my screen?
We sure can.
Well, how about that? I'm two for two. It's a good start. All right. So as Lisa said, my name is Debbie Smith. I am the support and monitoring coordinator here at the SDE. And this is going to be a very high level view of special education. If I can get my screen to advance. There we go. So oftentimes when you are hearing about special education, you'll hear about Part B and Part C, which could be confusing for some of you. So primarily our role here at the SDE, we are focused on IDEA Part B. So focused on students who are aged 3 through 21, but occasionally we'll hear about Part C because our obligation affiliation for special education is really to work with those infants and toddlers who are identified when they're very young and help ease that transition from Part C, infants and toddlers, to Part B. So here's just a little overview of the difference between Part B and Part C if you're hearing IDEA Part B. So then the 6 key elements of IDEA standing for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is that number 1, it's non-discriminatory evaluation. So if we have concerns about students that require us to evaluate that student, that we're doing it in a way that is without bias. And so, for example, if we had a student who was, Hispanic or had a different language, we have to make sure that our assessments address that and that we're using appropriate assessments. The second part of IDEA is procedural safeguards. Really, those are the parent or guardian's rights around special education. It's quite a lengthy little booklet. We're required to hand those out at least annually. But it really explains all of the rights that a parent has if their student is in special education or they believe that their student or child has a disability. The next part is FAPE, which is the free, appropriate public education. You will hear a lot about FAPE. And so really that it's free. That's the first part. It comes at no cost to parents or the students. Appropriate, meaning that we are providing services to the students aligned to that student's individual needs. It comes at no cost. It's part of our public school system, and that the education that we're providing to the students really is what that student needs. So when you hear the word FAPE, free, appropriate public education. The fourth part of IDEA is parent participation, that we want parents to be fully engaged in the special education process. And so often, I think, not often, but sometimes we will hear about parents will say, it's overwhelming. The whole process of special ed, because it's complicated, it can be very overwhelming to parents. And so just making sure that we as educators are talking to our parents and explaining the process as we go and all the millions of acronyms we use in special education. As far as being individualized education program, that part of it, again, we're meeting the individual student's needs. And this is all being done in the least restrictive environment. We strive to have students being educated with their same age peers as often as appropriate. And so that's always the goal in special education. So as far as resources in Idaho, I feel like when I'm going out and doing national things, I think Idaho is very well equipped with lots of really great resources. Of course, we have our State Department of Education. Sometimes you'll hear about SESTA, which stands for Idaho Special Education and Technical Assistance. And then we also have the Idaho Training Clearinghouse, or referred to often as the ITC. Both SESTA and ITC are funded through the State Department of Education. We grant fund both of those programs. And so if I are you still seeing my screen?
We sure can.
Okay, so just real quick here, I'm gonna, here we are on the SDE's website. And so, just clicking on our special education button here, you'll see that we have several different places that an LEA can go to access lots of things regarding special education. And so platforms and portals, that's where our directors go to do lots of data reporting. If you're ever wanting any information about upcoming special education events. We have our events calendar here. This particular website is getting an update. And so coming soon, I'm hopeful that this will happen within the next week or so. We're going to have an actual parent button down here. So all resources for parents around special education. So from here, we can click over on the side and we will have the two topics that I just talked about, the Idaho Trading Clearinghouse and Idaho SESTA. Clicking on ITC, this really, I mean, they call it a clearinghouse. I refer to it as a warehouse because it is everything that you would ever want, to know about special education. And so our topics are vast. You can see right here, and then you can search by your particular role. If you're a business manager, just in my conversations with Lisa, you're not going to find a lot of fiscal information on here. This is more for those directors who are really in the weeds with special education. And then finally, as I mentioned, SESTA, our support people. The one thing about SESTA that I think is really remarkable here in Idaho is that every LEA in the state of Idaho has an assigned SESTA coordinator who is really the person to hold their hand. It's their hotline person. If they have any questions about special education, they know they can call their SESTA coordinator and they'll help them through all of the regulations around special education. So yeah, just again, a quick little overview of special education. And if you have any questions or anything you ever want to talk about regarding special education, I'm always here, and we have a great staff here at the SDE who's always willing to help. So Lisa, if there was anything that I didn't cover, I know one thing that you had asked me to talk about, and that's On Track. On Track is a special education class that I offer each year. My target audience is directors who are in their first and second year as special education directors. We meet almost monthly for 2 hours, and that is virtual. And we just talk about lots of things. Let me bring up the slideshow again. Okay. Are you seeing my screen still?
Right now we just see your name, so I don't think you're sharing yet.
Okay, let me go back to my screen share again.
I love using our platform here. Business office folks, if you know you're going to have a brand new director for special ed, get them to Debbie's class. We can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Let me get up here. So here's my On Track slide, and you can see here the topics that we do talk about. And first and foremost, fiscal and timelines. Lisa is gracious enough to join us for On Track and really talk to all the directors about the fiscal pieces of IDEA. We talk a lot about data and reporting and timelines, secondary transition, early childhood, Medicaid, school-based services, and I always send out a syllabus. So if you, as a business manager on the call, feel like you need more information around special education and the fiscal components of that, just talk to your new special ed director and just say, hey, can I join you for class today if they happen to be enrolled? Or if you just want to reach out to me and say, can I join the class this month because, you know, it's topics that I'm interested in, I'd happily send you the Zoom link. So yeah, there's a list of the things we talk about. We have guest speakers every time we meet, and the feedback on the class has been really positive. I feel like, you know, special education, there's just so much to learn. So we're happy to be here and help those new directors. And honestly, some more veteran special ed directors who just don't feel confident about certain topics. We are opening the doors to those folks as well to join this class.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. And really, that's what Communities of Practice is about, and that's what Debbie's building over there in this other class that she offers. So again, if you have some new directors that you know of, whether you're a director on the call or whomever, we just want to make sure that you guys know that those are some other resources that are available. And again, we're trying to build confidence. That's what these communities are, confidence in the practices that we do every day and our processes. Now, with that, we're going to move right into some professional development about gift card purchasing. Now, I used to work in a business office, so I know that I'd have these program directors come to me and say, so I want to buy $55 gift cards to Starbucks or Dutch Bros or whatever, and blah, 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 blah. Well, there's lots of little nuances with funding sources, but sometimes it's all about the source, but sometimes it's not. So we're going to talk about that. So you guys have some clout, some grounds to stand on when you talk to some of the folks about some of the things they may or want to do with their funding sources. So let's start by talking about it. Are gift cards an allowable purchase with public funds? Public being the key word here. What do you guys think? Yes, no? Chime in the chat before I move. I'm just curious. Do you guys think in general, should we be able to make gift card purchases? Why not? Why shouldn't we be able to? I get this all the time. Well, my staff work really hard and I just want to give them each a little Starbucks card at the end, so, really the answer usually is, well, it depends. And that's kind of what we're going to go through today, but we're going to talk about why, so that you get this in your head and you can then help others decide as well. So with that, let's talk more about in the weeds of it. Why? What's the why? Well, in general, the answer is no. And we're going to talk about the why in just a second. So our superhero looks a little, what? As he's staring at this sentence, generally speaking, why can't I? Is it because you're thinking all funds are federal? Because mostly funds are not federal, right, at the district. Well, let's talk about why. Usually, the main components as to why we say no is conflicts of interest and lack of audit trail, okay? So that's the reasoning, that's the scrutiny. So the conflict of interest is that it can look like it was a personal benefit. That Starbucks card was for you. It was not to run the program. So whenever we use public funds, public, not just federal, it is necessary to have an audit trail, right? You guys get audited for everything under the sun, and that helps ensure that funds are not used for an inappropriate item like alcohol, cigarettes, whatever. You don't know. So because they don't have an audit trail. So that's why we would say they're generally unallowable. Now, it's not to say that's not the answer for everyone, but we're going to talk a little bit more in the weeds as to why. So a lot of times people say this de minimis thing. Well, it's considered nominal. It's de minimis. It's, there used to be this historical threshold. The IRS would say if it's under $25, it doesn't really matter. Well, that's no longer the case. Gift cards or cash equivalents is what they're considered. They're now taxable regardless of the amount. And the reason is because they're essentially the same as cash. They're considered an easy item to be accounted for, so they're taxable. Now, gifts, awards, and prizes cannot be given in lieu of services. That's another reasoning. So, hey, if you do this, we'll give you a gift card instead of paying you, instead of putting you on payroll, instead of you having to have taxes. So that's really about what the IRS's viewpoint is about de minimis. Okay, so let's talk about reasoning. Their reasoning is protecting employee pay. Since gift cards are exempt from the taxes, it could encourage companies to just redistribute your payroll and give you gifts for this, that, and the other to avoid taxes. So again, the takeaway here, regardless of the amount, the gift card given to an employee really should not be considered a de minimis fringe benefit. Okay, so it would need to be included on your W-2 and it would be subject to tax withholdings. I know that's a bummer. I only got a $25 gift card. Now you're taking taxes out of it. I know it seems ridiculous, but I've got links. You guys can read up on it. I'm not going to tell you what you can and cannot do, but we're talking about guidance here. So giving you something to think about, to review your own policies and practices, if you will. Now, cash equivalents provided by the employer really never excludable as income. So again, that's something to think about. Some people need to hear me say it as gift certificate versus gift card. That's why we're kind of revamping it here for gift certificates. This is language specific to same premise, but as the word gift certificates. They're still not de minimis because it's personal property and value at that point. It's something that can be considered for personal benefit. So I have here on my third bullet, let's check with your own board policies and practices. What does your board say? What do you have in place on the purchase of gift cards or gift certificates? And another link to IRS here for you. Now, let's really talk about the federal funds, because that's what this group is mostly about, right? We're going to talk about, what does it say? Well, ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, refers to the Uniform Grant Guidance. Our friend, our best friend, the Uniform Grant Guidance tells us what we should do uniformly across all our federal grant programs for the most part. And it says you have to implement and maintain financial management systems that comply with the federal systems and management required in the Code of Federal Regulations. Wait, what? What does this all mean? Well, it's telling us that we have to maintain financial management systems. So to me, and to most other people that interpret that, that means you have to have a way to track it, right? Now, there's additional specifics that I've pulled out here for you guys under 200-445. So remember, Uniform Grant Guidance is 2 CFR 200 and everything after. So this talks about goods and services for personal use. Again, personal. Is it something that you've given to somebody for their personal use? That's an unallowable expense, regardless whether it's taxed or not, is what the Uniform Grant Guidance says. So this is even more stringent than the IRS really is saying, hey, we don't want to use grant funds for personal use. The grant funds are given for a programmatic use, okay? Think about it that way. And then back to internal controls. You have to have a way to have an effective internal control over the money. Now, if you give it out as a gift card, what did we talk about? There's no audit trail. So you have to think about those, how they go hand in hand together. And that's why there's such strong language against it. They don't actually call it out and say it in statute as gift cards, but it is very much applied in that way. So that's how most folks interpret that. So as we, again, have these conversations, we want you to try to think through what your own policies and practices are at your district, knowing that there are super, super strict restrictions here on gift cards regarding federal funds. And really, we'll talk about this in purchasing overall here in the next couple minutes about the people that have access to the purchasing and how much they may or may not know about the funding source, okay? Now, cost allocability, this is the other piece that's really high on the list of the feds as to why it's not allowable for you to go buy gift cards for purchases, because it's not assignable to the federal award's cost objectives. The cost objectives are, what is the objective of the grant? What are we trying to accomplish here? So again, if this is for like special education purposes, we're trying to make sure that we give a free and appropriate education to all these students. Are these gift cards to Starbucks going to make that happen? No. So that's why it's not something that's important or assignable to the cost objectives. So this is the actual full listing of the allocable costs. We're going to have a whole other training on this next fall about how do we know if something's necessary, reasonable, and allocable. But again, think about, what is the premise of the program that you're serving, and is it necessary for the actual operation for you to be able to do this program? So super high level there. We'll get into the weeds in the fall. Now, Uniform Grant Guidance more, there's a whole section on misuse of funds. So when you think about gift cards, again, we can't track what happened, but there's all these other provisions in the Uniform Grant Guidance, like avoiding alcoholic beverages or anything that looks like it's for entertainment. So if you give somebody something for personal use and you can't track it, who knows what they used it for? Really, you just don't know. And that's the whole problem. You don't know. Now, are there any exceptions? Yes, even for federal, there's an exception. There's always some wonky exception, but in this case, it makes sense. The McKinney-Vento homeless youth grant funding, they have some exceptions. And if you think about it, there's sometimes the need, right? So I have a link to the page here to our SDE page for McKinney-Vento, and the coordinator is Emily Summer. And I know she has other information on this, but if you think about the uses even for this, they will be very restricted if they're allowable. It might be something really small, like a small nominal amount to a laundromat. the only place you can use this is the laundromat for laundry, and that possibly would be one of the acceptable uses with a gift card. So again, there's always some little exception, but for the most part, no is the answer. All right. What about accepting gifts? We don't want to forget about that, right? So I've given you the Idaho code on this, gifts subject to public servants, right, and their jurisdictions. And really what this says is that nobody that's a public servant, and you guys are public servants at the school districts, if you're involved with purchasing contracts, payments, claims, any kind of transactions that could be tied back, you're not allowed to take a gift. Okay. And really, this is what it means overall is no optics of quid pro quo. So no tit for tat. No, you gave me this, I'll give you that. Thanks for the gift or the golf clubs or the lunch, whatever it might be. I'll go ahead and give you the contract. We don't want things to ever look that way. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But the answer here is again, no. Now, again, big takeaways on the federal component for gift card purchasing. It's not allowable. Okay, because even if it was intended to be used for an allowable use under the program, the recipient really, you can't track it. You don't know how it's going to be used, even if you thought it would be used for the program, again, knowingly or unknowingly. So make sure that you use this as your guidance, look at your own policies and practices, and know about that one exception that might be allowable under the McKinney-Vento Act, okay? Now we're going to talk a little bit more about procurement. How can we start and end our year strong? We're kind of in the in-betweenies right now, right? Because we're starting to close out last year. We're getting busy with all those accruals. We're starting the new year out. We're trying to set up encumbrances in the new year, close them out in the old year. All these things that are happening in the procurement world. It's kind of crazy. You guys probably have 2 fiscal years open. You're trying to determine what fund balances are going to be where. There's so much going on. So let's do a little outline here. Here's our Blackboard for today. We're going to do a very high level overview. We're going to talk about methods. We're going to review the Build America, Buy America Act, the BABAA. Remember, we trained on that a couple months ago. Excuse the sirens in the back. We're going to also talk about state of Idaho procurement methods, very high level statewide contracts, so you can know if you can tie into some of those, and then procurement and practice. We'll do a whole nother training in the future, coming up in the near future on contracts again, because there's been some other contractual changes that you guys should learn about. But let's start with what is procurement. So really, this involves purchasing, right? We need to buy food or supplies or goods or services. This is how it's defined under federal code. Okay, that's the definition of it. Now, procurement involves lots of steps. You got to plan. You got to sometimes go out for a request for proposal. If it's a large amount, you've got to have vendor selection and performance and monitoring to make sure that those are valid vendors, make sure that the rates you're getting charged are reasonable. So many different components to procurement. So also LEAs have to consider both the state and federal guidelines. Yes, there are different guidelines. And then district-wide or charter. What did your board decide? So key here at the bottom is that LEAs have to follow whichever regulations are the most restrictive. So even though I'm going to train you here today about what the federal components are, and we'll show you what some of the state components are, if your LEA has decided and adopted a more restrictive rule, you got to use it across the board, even with your federal funds. Okay, so most restrictive, and you'll apply it across the board. Now, why is it so important? Why is procurement so important? Well, you have to be able to plan to ensure you have the funds and that they're wisely spent. You also have to make sure that you're stocked with the supplies or the curriculum or whatever it might be that you need, testing supplies to run your programs, and make sure that you've planned to receive the services that you contracted for. So many of you guys that have shared services somewhat through contractors and whatnot because you can't maybe hire as many staff as you needed to. So you got to make sure that you procure for those contracts as well, so that you have those folks available to be able to help you run your programs. And really our bottom bullet here, to mitigate shortcomings that may otherwise impact students, right? We want to make sure that students can come to school and learn, and that we have staffing, services, supplies, everything that we need to be able to run those programs. Now, ethical procurement, another area we want to talk about. procurement really should foster public confidence in what we're doing in our state and local government processes. So what can we do so that we can make sure that there's the avoidance of any appearance of impropriety? Okay, so what can we do to demonstrate loyalty and unbiased decision-making so that it's fair, it's reasonable? What do we do to make sure that we've conducted all activities in a way that keeps the public trust going? We want them to make sure they feel like their tax dollars are being utilized for the right things and at a good rate. We have to make sure that there's no way they think that there was any way that we had personal gain. And this can include who you hire for a contractor. You can't hire Aunt Susie to do stuff. You've got to make sure that you go out for bid for certain things, or that you have a process in place to show that there's no personal gain. There's no quid pro quo. There's none of that. Identifying cost-saving methods, that's another thing. So is there some sort of consortium that you can get in on so that you can get a better rate? Those types of things. Taxpayers love knowing that their tax dollars got spent in the best way possible. Now, also, we want to make sure that we are promoting competition, the right type of competition in an open marketplace, right? So that everybody has the opportunity to go and say, yeah, I would like to be one of your contractors, or here's my stuff. Take a look. Is it what you need? I'm trying to be competitive. So we're trying to share it across and not just always choose the same old vendors. We want to, again, mitigate the risk of waste, abuse, fraud, overpayment for goods. That overpayment for goods, nobody likes it when they see that they paid way too much for something. So we have to stay competitive. We have to make it look like we tried to find the best deals that we could. And again, displaying the highest level of integrity. The public wants to know that you have integrity, that you're doing what's right and you're doing what's best for students, so that we, on this bottom bullet here, enhance student outcomes and their academic achievement through the right contracts. If we have the right people in the right positions and the right services being able to be given to students, then our constituents feel good about everything. They want to know that we're using their dollars correctly. And the feds want to know this too, okay? So this applies to your state dollars, this applies to your federal dollars. Now let's talk about federal procurement, all right, for the US, if you didn't notice the flag. So there's a couple of different informal procurement methods, and they define these under Section 320 of the Uniform Grant Guidance. So informal procurement methods may be used when the value is under $250,000, okay? Or, and we have all these red pop-out words for you, or a lower threshold that might be established by the non-federal entity, okay? So again, we're gonna go with that. Who's the most restrictive? If it's your own district guidelines, you got to go with that. You can't say, oh, I'd rather do federal here. You got to go across the board, and it has to be whatever's been adopted. So there's lots of different thresholds. They're further delineated into what we call micro purchases and small purchases. So micro purchases are those generally under 10,000. Again, these are the federal procurement guidelines that we're talking about today. And I want to make sure there's somebody in the waiting room, if somebody could admit them for me. Okay, so we have these informal $250,000 threshold, but let's get into the micro purchases. There are sometimes some folks at districts that set up micro purchases specific to P card thresholds even that I've seen, where they say, hey, we're within our guidelines of our 10,000, we'll set another layer under that for P card purchases up to $500 or something without POs and all kinds of different things that they determine. So it depends on what your own restrictions are, but this, we consider at the federal level, micro purchases up to $10,000. Then we say 10,000 to 49,000 or almost up to 50. That's what we would call a small purchase. And what does this all mean? What does this mean? Well, micro purchases, again, this is talking about the up to 10,000. We want to make it practical. To the extent that it's practical, the non-federal entity should distribute among qualified suppliers. Okay, so they're saying if you can redistribute this among the right types of suppliers, you know, not as much oversight on these lower micro purchases. And then, so again, distribution, and now we get into the awards. The awards could be awarded without price or rate quotes to a non-federal entity if you consider it reasonable. So this is, again, getting into bids. if you don't have a more restrictive than this, you might not have to get 3 quotes if it's under this threshold in this micro purchase level. But many, many, many LEAs have a smaller threshold. So look at your policies and practice, see what you guys deem as that micro purchase level that you don't have to have quotes up to, okay? So that's what we're trying to talk about right here. So these other thresholds, again, up to the 10,000, they're determined and documented by the grantee, by you guys on your own internal controls, your risks and your procedures, okay? So you may have authorized by the state, it could be higher than this 10,000, but it's not in general. Okay, so when we talk about those other thresholds, this is where you might not want to talk to your auditor and your own superintendent and board and what they deem as what you guys have set for your internal controls based on prior audits that you've had. So if you're considered a low risk auditee for your most recent audit, they may be flexible with you on setting those thresholds and saying, yeah, you guys are low risk, you've been doing a good job, you have good policies and practices. Let's bump our threshold for this micro purchases up to 5,000. Let's just say it was higher than that before or lower than that before. Maybe you just want to make a change to it in general. So you guys talk through that with your auditor. And again, it needs to be an adopted practice if you guys decide to make those changes. Okay. And then this bottom bullet, if it's over 50,000, you usually have to have an approval from the cognizant agency. Okay. Now, small purchases, that's that next bucket, that 10,000 to 50,000 range. What is that? That's used for purchases, that are still under the 250,000. So this is the bigger contracts, but not the big building contracts, for instance. So this is where you still have to have a rate or a quote from adequate number of qualified sources. A lot of districts do that rule of 3. So make sure you review whatever your policy and practice is and make sure that you share that with the folks that are doing the purchases. Because if you have this rule and, you have a department that goes to make a purchase and they didn't know about it, you don't want to have to do that after the fact. You want to make sure that you've shared this information. They know that they need to get those 3 quotes if they're in this threshold range for purchasing. And again, this is the federal one. What you as a district or an LEA may be putting together for what you deem a small purchase may be different. So think through for these thresholds, again, based on internal controls, those risk procedures, it has to be documented by your board. So make sure that you guys have it well documented, you share it across the board so that everyone that's a purchaser knows what it is. Formal procurement methods, again, can be used when it doesn't exceed the 250,000 or a lower threshold, but all these purchases still require documentation for your procedures. You still have to have public advertising and ensure competition and all those different pieces if you're going with the formal procurement method. Non-competitive. Let's talk about what non-competitive. Well, really, micro purchases are considered non-competitive because you didn't need those bids. You didn't need the 3 quotes. Or also think about items that are only available as a sole source. Okay. So sometimes there is only one vendor that is out there that offers this very specialized thing that you need. Special ed has some really hard to find components that if you need that component, there's maybe 1 or 2 vendors and they will vary so vastly in the what you need that you definitely need option number 1 over number 2. So be able to make that case for a single source. And then also we've seen public emergencies. We just went through one, right? Sometimes it's like wherever you can find that thing that you need, if it's in stock, you need to just be able to buy it on the spot or it'll be gone. So there are some exceptions. There's always exceptions. Here's some more about non-competitive. Let's talk about the pass-through agency such as yourself or such as myself authorizes a non-competitive procurement. So if the SEA tells you that you can do this for these certain types of things, there might be that authorization for non-competitive procurement. Usually that's dictated for something that we've already researched and would know there really isn't much competition, or we've given you a list of sources. And then this last one here, after soliciting a number of sources, sometimes you guys determine that the competition is just not adequate. Again, option A was really the only thing that did everything we needed it to. So we're going to go with option A. All right, now domestic preference. There's all these other items listed under federal funding and procurement. But what they basically say is to the greatest extent practical, we want you to buy stuff from the US. That's what that means. So a lot of times we don't think about that. We don't say, was it made in America or was it made in wherever? But we want to make sure that this is somewhere that we've acknowledged and that we've looked into it to see if we can buy things that are produced in our own country. Okay, and this is something we have to include in all subawards and contracts and purchase orders as well, if you have something that you sub out. Now, the 117th Congress put together the Build America, Buy America Act. We trained on this a couple months ago. This is something new that came out. And what this is they wanted us to specifically, it's part of the Infrastructure Act. They wanted us to make sure the iron and steel and construction-related project stuff came from the U.S. as well. So they kind of went more in the weeds specifically to the infrastructure. So this applies to some funds that you guys have access to. And really getting back into this again, we've talked about this in the past, but the big red bold here at the end, it's about buildings and property as well. So if you guys are doing a remodel, or you guys were thinking of blending and braiding funding streams, this is something you have to know about. Do we have to worry about it? Well, maybe. It doesn't apply to ESSER or to like the CARES, ARPA, those things. But US Ed does allow for some waivers on the actual funding streams that it does apply to. We have the list of those programs here. The ones in red are the ones that I trained on it, but I can't stop training on it because you guys need to know that it's still there. It's in the background looming. All of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act money, all of the special ed money, the 611 school age or the preschool grants, the regular grants and the ARPA grants that are about to expire this fall. It applies. So if you were blending and braiding, it might not make sense to do so if it becomes too hard to apply some of these provisions to. Yes, again, there are some exceptions, but there might be a better strategy for funding sources. Now, let's talk briefly here about procurement methods in Idaho, okay? Idaho procurement has different thresholds. So now we're looking at state levels and it ranges from 0 to 50,000. It's not regulated in code, very detailed. So what that means is that the federal statutes for micro and small purchases would be applied if goods and services would be purchased with federal funds. Because again, this is, if Idaho code just broke it into 0 to 50, that didn't do the micro and the small like we did before. So think about what we talked about with the federal grant component, that 0 to 10,000 in the micro. So that's more restrictive than what state of Idaho says. So if you're using the federal funds, you would have to apply that. Now, the thresholds for Idaho code can't exceed 99,000, but it is the 50,000 and up. So this is where we talk about written requests for bids. So when would you have to have a bid with this? So think about that. But again, I would encourage you just look at your own policies and practices, because from what I've seen across the board, most of you guys have more restrictive than even the federal. So we're showing you what Idaho code says, but if your district again has something that is more restrictive, make sure you apply those thresholds to the desired rule of 3. That's 3 vendors to be getting bids for. So look and see what that is and what your written procedures say. Now for Idaho code again, though, the thresholds that exceed 100,000, this is where you have to publish a notice at least 2 weeks in advance. It's like open for bid. Hello, here I am. So that's the threshold for the bidding purpose. So you understand what the procurement under Idaho is. There's also some other changes that just came out about the Anti-Boycott Against Israel Act. There's new legislation that had come out in 2021. So if you don't know what these are, you can reach out to us to help you clarify. But really, there's lots of changes coming through the legislature at any point in time. I have some more code here specifically to purchasing by political subdivisions or cooperative purchasing, the second one here. So that, can you get in on an agency bidding clause? Those types of things. Can LEAs purchase from already advertised and awarded bids? Yes. And this is what tells you that you can. So if you think you want to do something that you've seen somebody else do, you can look to see for purchasing with your state or your federal funds. You can see if it was already advertised and awarded under another LEA or agency. Now, contracts, prices, and terms. This is talks about all the conditions that can be extended under other public agencies. It's all defined in code, and we're going to talk about, well, how do I know if I'm a public agency? Well, there's actually code that defines it. It says it's not limited to counties, and it lists school districts that are created under the laws of the state of Idaho, or any other agency is what they would determine a public agency. So that's how you know that you can fall under the other procurement clause, to see if you can get in on those other bids. All right, now let's talk about briefly, as we end here, with some procurement and practice and planning. Code of ethics, we talked briefly about that. Conduct and our conflict of interest policies. Who is named as an authorized purchaser? What awarding methods do we have? What about advertising procedures? All these things, award notifications. So what do we have in place? What should our written plan have? Continued here, do we have the method? Does it talk about all of our procedures? Did it talk about that Buy America provision? Do we have the small minority and women-owned businesses? Do we have cost price analysis? Do we have something that helps us get away from unnecessary duplicate purchases? Because, you know, if there's some group rate that we can get for our entire agency or LEA, why are we paying for individualized little duplicate mini applications, or even software? You know, if there's a group rate, we should be doing that. That's what that means. Now, the SDE, I'm going to go back to ethics. We actually have a procurement code of ethics, and it lists this out. So if you don't have a code of ethics and you want an example to start with, or to look at, to maybe start implementing for yourselves, it's something you could look at. But really what ours is saying is that we want to make sure that we're fostering confidence and integrity in our whole process, and that we are bound by this code of ethics, and that nobody is benefiting individually, right? And now this is the slide I really want to talk about, but here's what it's saying that we shall do. We have to avoid the appearance of impropriety. We have to demonstrate loyalty and unbiased decision-making. All the activities have to be essential to make sure that we ensure and preserve public trust. No personal gain, right? Has to look like it's actually for the constituents, right? The benefits of the constituents. Identifying those cost-saving methods, always cost-saving, no bribes, positive competition, just, again, integrity to the whole process, that we can delineate it. There's Transparency Idaho for the state agencies, but you guys know public records requests can happen as well. So we want to make sure that we have high integrity of our accounting. And enhance student academic achievement. That's what this is all for. We're running schools, right? So can we show that we're spending the money the right ways to enhance those outcomes and the achievements? Real quick here, letters of invitation. If you guys go out for bid, here's some of the things you need to make sure that you have in it. Always the procurement activity. What was the intent? What's the time period? What are the procedures? Was there a pre-bid proposal, dates, locations, all of that, and full contract information. And here is the Idaho code for the request for proposals. Needs to have all the specifications in here. To make sure that you're not missing anything. A specific problem that's amendable. Price is not the sole determining factor. There's lots of things that go into it. It's not always the lowest rate. It's the most applicable. So think about that. Now, I have, again, at the minimum, this is again from that code, what it is that you need to make sure that you're looking for. I don't want to take too much time up because we just have a couple minutes. I want to get down to the best practices here. Let's talk about best practice. Again, overall procurement methods, separation of duties. That's the biggest one that I can't stress enough. You got to make sure that you have that. This is how you make sure there's no fraud, right? Somebody that's doing one component of the purchasing can't be the final also at the end approving it. So you have to have this to prevent fraud and abuse. You should have the use of purchase orders, including terms and conditions, contracts and services, apply the uniform grant guidances. Make sure that you have a legal review of your documents from your legal counsel to make sure that they're legitimate and that they'll be acceptable also for internal control purposes from your auditors. So these are the things that can make you feel super like this gal over here in the picture. So back to best practices, remember who's in your purchasing group. Not everyone has been to a federal procurement training or even a state procurement training. So make sure that you're spreading this knowledge and that you're helping them understand what funding sources they have access to. Now, final reflection on purchasing. We know it has so many components, so many things you guys have to go out for bid or not for bid, or to try and make sure you get the services that you need. But again, second bullet here, you have lots of staff assigned. They might need some purchasing training or at least a refresher, or at least let them know if they're even using federal funds and if they should use this other list of more restrictive things to help them when they're making purchases. Make sure that you have the right approval chains. And we know that staffing changes and the approval chains might need to change too. So make sure you get that. You don't want a finding because you had forgotten to update an approval chain. And remember, those policies and procedures have got to be in place and your auditors will want to check for them. And that various funding sources and grant programs, again, have more additional restrictions and requirements. So make sure you think about those and that you know what they are. And if you have questions, that you reach out to someone at the SDE. And that wraps up procurement. That was high level. It wasn't that in the weeds. That was still high level. But we want to get you some other dates on your radar to save for some more upcoming training. So I want you guys to save the date for that ESEA and IDEA fall workshop. It's supposed to be the 14th and 15th of September. If you haven't been to that before, it's a lot of programmatic stuff. So yes, there are some components for business officers. So talk that over with your staff amongst yourselves to see once the agendas come out, if that's something that you want to attend. It's mostly put on by staff at the SDE that put on those trainings for you guys. And then the new schedule for our communities of practice, we're going to actually switch to the third Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. We'll continue recordings and we're going to send out a new invite soon for registrations to hopefully, instead of blasting it out to everybody, we'll be just going for the core group that is selected to be on that. And then I'm just checking the chat to see if we have any questions. But I wanted to, before we close, I want to make sure that you guys know that we're thankful for you guys. You guys are doing a great job. You're asked to do so many things and you're pulled left and right. We want to make sure you have access to resources. Don't forget, there's all these staff here from the federal programs to help you. There's all these staff from the special education team to help you. And we're here at any time to help you. That is our job. So make sure that you reach out if you have questions. This was a lot. If you have specific questions about your own policy and practice and you want us to take a look or weigh in, or you don't understand what one component might mean, please reach out. That's our job. And with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if you have any questions for me later, send me an email. And that's going to wrap it up for our communities of practice. And we'll see you guys next month. Have a great day.